everyone, and welcome to another Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your 10-minute escape from daily life to think about ancient warfare. And I answer questions sent in by viewers and listeners in various forms, emails and postcards. You can comment on a video. You can, of course, back us on Patreon. Lots of our questions coming from patrons. You just need to go to Patreon/Ancient Warfare Podcast, and you can back us there at one of three levels. There's Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. $1, $5, $10. For $5, you get a digital copy of the magazine, and for $10, you get a print copy of the magazine every 2 months, bi-monthly. Not meaning twice a month, but meaning every 2 months. Anyway, now, this question has been sent in by Aaron Friedman, and it's a comment about one of the earlier podcasts I made. On your comment about written battle accounts, were empire era writings less common, lost to time, or were the generals less educated than Republican era generals? Ooh, interesting. This was in the context of talking about the Battle of Mons Graupius, I think, in an earlier podcast, where we've only got Tacitus's account and very few others. And it's true that for the Roman Empire, we have Tacitus for events of the first century, not as many as we'd like. He's fragmentary in both his histories and the Annales. We also have the histories of Josephus, who's very good, and then Dio Cassius, again, survives large passages in fragmentarily. And then later in the Roman Empire, we do have Ammianus Marcellinus and then Procopius. But that, of course, is 700 years of history. And we know of lots of other sources that have been lost. And so the first answer to your question, Aaron, is indeed lots have been lost to time. We know of accounts written by Marcus Aurelius, accounts written by Trajan, and other generals, Domitius Corbulo, and others, about their campaigns that just do not survive, unless they survive in the fragmentary accounts of the other historians. But often those historians don't include a lot of detail on the military campaigns of those generals, and so maybe they didn't use them, and that's problematic. Now, we also, of course, have Arrian, who's most famous as a historian of Alexander the Great, but who was a general and a commander himself, and we do have his Tactica and his Ectaxis, which is his array against the Alans, as it's translated. So in about 136, 137 AD, he leads an army against a marauding band of Alans and draws up his army and tells us what he does, which is interesting. Now, we've got to piece all of that together, though. The problem is, of course, you've got Josephus, you've got Arrian, and you've got these sort of other battle accounts, which are all we've got to go on to tell us about what the Roman imperial army did in the field, which is not a lot. Of course, you've got visual mediums as well. You've got the Trajan's column, famously, and Marcus Aurelius's column, slightly less famously, the Adam Clissi monuments as well under Trajan, and several other architectural and archaeological finds which tell us stuff, and of course so much armor and weapons and helmets to tell us the story, or confuse the story, as the case may be. Now, in addition to the lost to time, frustrating as that is, we've also got the idea of, under the Roman Empire, of course, the commander-in-chief of all the Roman armies is the emperor himself. And therefore, the generals who are writing about their own campaigns face the problem of highlighting their own achievements and therefore being sidelined, asked to fall on their sword, put to death, blacklisted by the emperor. And of course, in the historians, especially in Tacitus and Cassius Dio, you've got the idea of good emperors and bad emperors. And bad emperors, of course, are jealous and petty and will stop the careers of good generals, like Agricola, according to Tacitus. And, Domitius Corbulo falls on the sword like a good general when Nero demands it. The interesting thing there, of course, is those accounts don't survive, except in little tiny fragments. And there are other ideas that there are careers, and I've spoken about Frontinus many times. His career doesn't suffer. And there are other generals whose careers don't suffer under bad emperors. We don't have any battle accounts by them either, unfortunately. But it's the idea that, these bad emperors block what the generals did, or, take credit for them. That is, I think, problematic. We've got a couple of fragments of Lucius Verus's commentary when he goes on the Parthian War in the 160s, but it's not particularly useful for what the battles were looking like, unfortunately. And so I think the interesting thing there is they probably were less common. So even with these generals' accounts, you've actually probably got people don't want to read about battle in the detail that Julius Caesar gave us, for instance. It's not the done thing, because of course the commander-in-chief is the emperor, and so the credit isn't being taken by these generals. And so when we look at Arrian, very much the exception, and Josephus, who's not Roman, again the exception, and those battle accounts in Tacitus which do survive, that's not the emphasis. We do rely on Vegetius writing in the late 4th or early 5th century AD to tell us about how Roman armies deployed. It's Josephus and Vegetius. And another problem, so many problems, is that we use them to extrapolate what happens in 400 years of imperial Roman history, which is problematic in itself. So what have we done? Yeah, lost to time, less common. I think, yes, both of those things. Were the generals less educated than Roman Republican generals? No, I don't think so. I think that there is a long tradition of generalship in the Roman army, and there are some phenomenal generals in the imperial period. Most interestingly, of course, many of them are fighting for their emperor. Now, again, and I think I've spoken about it before, always, broken record me, the idea, of course, is that the good generals are there in person and they are active, and their subordinate commanders are, deferring to them. Bad emperors, are there. They might have bad generals because they're sycophants, not good generals, which I think is not true. I think that's the case in both. Good and bad emperors have good and bad generals. But of course, when you have a bad emperor like Domitian, for instance, we don't believe he was there in person in the front, even though the Praetorian Guard is, and we're told he's there. We poo-poo that. Then we're told, he took credit for it, but it wasn't his to take. But when it's a good general, they take credit for it, and it was theirs to take. And it's like, well, hang on, they're exactly the same scenario. A good emperor taking credit for what their subordinates do is no different from a bad emperor taking credit for what their generals do. But our idea is, well, he's a good emperor, he's a bad emperor. I think it's actually, no. Emperors are present. They either are responsible or they're not. It doesn't change whether you're a good or a bad emperor. You're there, and probably you're not responsible. Trajan was not responsible. Marcus Aurelius was not responsible, nor was Domitian, but they were there in person, and their subordinate generals, they commanded. But again, coming back to that first issue, they're fighting under the Roman Empire. They give credit to their emperor, not themselves, because they don't want to be, sidelined. That's true under good and bad emperors. And we weirdly give credit to good emperors that they were responsible, and we don't give it to bad emperors. And I think it's like, no, they don't get any credit, whether they be a good emperor in our estimation or a bad emperor. Their subordinates did all the commanding. And so there are very good generals in the Roman Empire. We hear less about them because they're not as publicized for those reasons above. So thank you for joining me. I hope that answered your question, Aaron. I hope I've raised more questions than I've answered. Join me again for another Ancient Warfare Answers, and I will attempt to answer your questions. Thanks. Bye.